Jeff, can you hear me?
Hey, Joe.
Hey, we've got a bunch of people already in. David is here. I was trying to unmute him and not doing it very well.
If you click the button at the bottom that says participants and has the two little heads on it,
yes,
it'll bring up a new window. And then there will be David Brooks is going to be in that list. And then there should be more. And you should be able to allow him to unmute himself.
Okay.
And if you would like, you could make me co-host doing that same thing, hitting that more button, and then I can start doing some other management stuff so you can talk when the meeting starts formally.
Now I have the more button, and it's how many? All right, I'm not seeing. I can find you on the screen here. Okay, here's Jeff, more, make host.
That works.
Okay.
There we go. So I've asked David to unmute so he can talk as well. You are unmuted as well. Everyone else is going to come in as muted.
Good.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Awesome. It's nice when that works out that way.
We try. We had a bad experience last time, so we've learned, and we've got Jeff handling the technical stuff behind the scenes, and so that's going to work out much better.
I will sit in the background and do things like admit guests as they come
in. So you're the Oz behind the curtain is what you're saying.
Exactly.
How are things up there in New York State, David?
Warm, but pretty good. It's I actually live north about 40 minutes from where I work, and it's a little resort town. It's a place where people like to come during the summer, and that means I want to flee. But we're getting there. This after Memorial Day, we'll see our population increase. I don't know, probably by about 25% throughout the rest of the summer.
I see. Well, I guess that's a blessing and a curse, I suppose, both wrapped up together.
Absolutely, yeah. And how are things down in New Jersey?
Everything is warm, and everything is sort of opening up. It's
nice.
Coming post-pandemic time, for better or worse. Restaurants are opening, and people are out and about. Some controversy over whether we're supposed to be wearing masks or not, but we seem to be on the mend.
Right. And, maybe by the end of summer, a lot of that will get worked out, and we'll have a better sense of what this new version of our reality is.
Yes. Some of our events are beginning to come online, and others are in the planning stage. And so by fall, we hope that or actually be having in-person events just like normal, just like the new normal anyway.
Yeah, that's been the odd shift actually this past winter. A lot of our planning and research and everything that happens, obviously during the winter, during an off season, and being kind of uncertain what was going to be going on for the year. A lot of that didn't really happen the same way. So even with things opening up around here, there's a kind of a lag in what we're able to offer.
Just looking at the list to see who's on board. People are coming in, but slowly.
Yep, we'll give it a few minutes. It's only 7:21, so we'll wait until 7:30. You can give the intro, and then we'll pass things over to David.
Questions at the when David is finished? Can you take questions?
Yes, I will remind people that they can ask questions via the chat function that we have here.
Okay, sounds good. Bierce will be joining me, and she'll be making a racket as soon as she comes in. So. David, are you involved in archival management up there at your site? Do you have any collections that you manage? Oh, he's muted now. So.
Yeah, so I went to clear my throat, so I thought I would mute myself, and not realizing that I wouldn't be able to do it again. So, yeah. Well, so far as our archival stuff, we have collections on site. I do a little bit of that, but I don't have a background in collections management because we are part of the New York State Park Recreation and Historic Preservation Agency. A lot of that happens actually with the Historic Sites Bureau, located on People's Island, closer to Albany, and we have a nice collection there and a fantastic staff that operate as part of that.
We've been working on our collection and just discovering there's a new version perfect that will allow us to do a lot more, and just investigating that.
Yeah, it's always nice when you can have something that's that diverse in what you're able to do with it, and not just an Excel spreadsheet.
Yes, they've got a new web that allows you to have more people accessing your files, and it's web-based so that you can access it cross-platform from any place that you can get into a web browser. So that's a big advance for them.
Very good. Yeah, I know that our agency is, I can't remember the name of it right now. They're working on adding a lot of our information to a large database for us to be able to do similar things like that. But I've had experience in a very small rural museum here in upstate, and their collections management was essentially a notebook.
Yes.
So digitizing that was kind of fun. By kind of fun, I mean long, arduous task.
Yes. It comes down to that at some point, always the grunt work of inputting all your stuff.
Yes.
Well, we have 10 by 20 storage unit that's crammed full. So it's going to be a long slog. Lots of good stuff in there.
You'll probably be very amazed at what you'll find.
Oh, we do. Lots of good stuff.
I know that there's a great collection. It's part of the Canal Society of New York's collection. It's housed at the Erie Canal Museum in Syracuse, and they have a grant, and they're going through and cataloging that. And part of that process is also posting things online using social media and sharing some of the new things or it hasn't been seen in years kind of materials, and it generates a lot of buzz, and I've been enjoying following that along.
Those things are possible now. We hope to be able to doing the same kinds of things.
And for some people, there's some reason people enjoy canals. I won't argue with them.
Yes, people do seem to enjoy canals, things with water in them.
Yes, yes.
Hey, it's the first rule of Disney World rides, right? They're the best rides are the ones on a boat.
There you go.
Pirates of the Caribbean, It's a Small World.
You know, It's a Small World still creeps me out a little bit. I have flashbacks to being on that ride.
Oh dear.
It's only really terrible if there's a backlog when you're trying to get off the ride. The music just keeps playing. It's like, I've been here for 20 minutes.
I will spare that. People are continuing to log in, 29 guests so far. We'll wait till about 7:35 before we start, let people join us. I know I see some board members there. I see some many guests. I don't see some names of people that I know are going to be joining us, so we'll give them a little time to log in.
Should I try at sharing my screen, or are you going to be having something up during the introduction?
No, that might be a good idea. Why don't you try?
Yeah, this might be a good time. Are you allowed to share your screen?
It says that I am disabled
Okay,
from being able to.
Let me allow you to share your screen. Okay, so try it again now. There we go.
Good.
And I always have to remember there seems to be a small lag when I do this through a Zoom or GoToMeeting or any of those platforms.
We're seeing you just fine here.
All right. And you're able to see the mouse if I point out anything?
Correct.
Great.
Good arrow.
Nice.
You folks that were waiting are giving it just a few more minutes. Let people join in. It's exactly 7:30 by my computer, so we're going to wait till 5 more minutes, and then we'll start our program. I just closed my door. I don't live too far from a busy road, and I'm sure that you might be able to hear the traffic. Background sounds are often greatly modified. Are people browsing the book table? Mm-hmm. Jeff, are you still there?
I am still here. I think we are ready to go. Welcome, everybody. We are recording this meeting and admitting people as they show up in the waiting room. Just as a note, everybody is muted by default. So if you have questions, there is a button at the bottom of your screen marked chat. Just send a chat out to everybody. Towards the end of the meeting, I will read questions out in the order we receive them. So whenever, Joe, you're ready, I guess we can get going.
Thank you. All right, welcome everybody. Welcome members and new members and guests, and thank you for joining us tonight. We have a nice warm spring day here, and hopefully things will be opening up post-pandemic. We've got lots of things going on this summer and some events that are opening up that I'm going to give you a little background on some of the things that are going on. Morris Canal Greenway activities are going to be quite interesting this summer. We're advertising again in Skylands Magazine. We had an article, an ad in the spring, and we'll be in the summer again, encouraging people to come out and walk on the Morris Canal Greenway. In Wharton, restoration work on Lock 2 East is going to be starting this summer with lots and lots of things to watch and see. As soon as that begins, we'll be sending out emails to let everybody knows what's going on. Also at Plain 2 East in Ledgewood, restoration work and site work will be starting this summer. So many things are going on. In Lincoln Park, they're working on a new parking lot at the Plain 10 trailhead, so people can park and walk. We'll be donating some signage to that. On a sad note, in Boonton, Canal Society works and is a member of the Boonton Trails Committee, and we've been working very hard to create Greenway Trail through the ironwork site and along the canal, and but made a lot of good progress there. Unfortunately, some of the area of the ironwork site was privately owned, has recently been sold to a developer, and the developer is moving ahead with building some rental units on that property. And we've been trying to negotiate with the town, and hopefully we'll get an opportunity to talk to the developer and see if we can save some of the artifacts, the historic artifacts of the ironworks before
residential or commercial,
before any more damage is done there. Also in Boonton, the restoration and stabilization of the Arch Bridge is going to be taking place this summer. In Warren County, Bilby Road Trail and Bridge are now open for hikers, and work on Plain 6 out in Port Colden is continuing. That site is not open to the public yet, but volunteers are busily clearing out the turbine chamber, and I think Dave Dietrich is working on some signage for that site. So many things will be happening over the summer. So watch your emails for different activities that you might like to visit and see in the process of coming together. Events for this year are coming in slowly. COVID restrictions are still uncertain. but we hope by fall that lots of things will be getting back to what we used to call normal anyway. However, I do have some firm dates. I've got a Waterloo Canal, Wharton Canal Day is firmly scheduled for August 21st. We are working with state parks for a Waterloo Canal Day in the fall in September, hopefully for September 18th, and even possibly in November, if we can work with the Park Commission, we'd like to schedule a symposium. So many of the events that you have attended and joined in the past, we're hoping to make available by the fall. So at this point, I'm going to introduce our speaker. David Brooks is the education director at Schoharie Crossing State Historic Site up in Fort Hunter, New York. And he's going to be giving us a great presentation about the Erie Canal and the Schoharie Crossing. David, would you like to take it away?
Yeah, thank you very much. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to speak to the Canal Society of New Jersey, tell you about the Erie Canal, and in particular, the Erie Canal at the Schoharie Creek. And in full disclosure, this is a presentation called A Crossing Situation. It's sort of a mashup of two other programs that I've put together recently. One of them is Dam That Creek, and the other one is Otis Eddy's Aqueduct. So this is an opportunity to kind of condense some of that information, put it into a singular mashed up program. Kind of taking advantage of great information and putting it out as kind of hopefully a cohesive and intelligible kind of format here. But just as a quick introduction to Schoharie Crossing, some that are joining us, I recognize a couple of the names that popped up. You might be familiar with Schoharie Crossing. And if you are a big Erie Canal fan of New York State's Grand Erie Canal, you may be familiar with Schoharie Crossing because we get identified quite a bit as being the location. And by that, I mean that we have a section of the original 1820s canal. We also have features from the enlarged Erie Canal in particular, and of great note, the remains of the Schoharie Creek Aqueduct. And we are also adjacent and run right along today's modern barge canal system that just actually opened up today. The canals in New York State opened today for recreation and cargo traffic. So that's pretty exciting up here on our end. We are a state historic site. We're part of the New York State Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation Office. And we actually, Schoharie Crossing was developed kind of at the call of the Fort Hunter Canal Society that formed in the 1950s. And underneath New York State Governor Nelson Rockefeller, established Schoharie Crossing as a state historic site and park in 1966. So I got some of the nuts and bolts out of the way on that. And you might be asking, where the heck is Schoharie Crossing? And so for your reference, because actually one of the things that I find even up here in the Mohawk Valley of New York is sometimes it can be confusing because we are not in Schoharie. We're not in Schoharie County. We are along the banks of the Schoharie Creek. It's in Montgomery County. And our site actually is about 3 miles long and traverses over from the town of Glen on the west side of the Schoharie Creek, and then to the town of Florida on the east side. And then there's the hamlet of Fort Hunter, in which our visitor center is located at 129 Schoharie Street. So that would be about a 3 to 3.5 hour drive from Morristown, New Jersey. Or apparently, according to Google Maps, it's a $400 plane ticket to Albany and then a drive in from there. So it's not all that far. It might be a day trip for those road warriors that want to get out and take a trip up. And if so, we are open by reservation for the visitor center. But the grounds of the site, which again encompasses about 3 miles, including towpath trail, is adjacent to the Empire State Trail for bicycling. We have a boat launch, great amenities for recreation, but we also have amazing history. The grounds are open from sunrise to sunset every day. Now I feel like I've gotten that perfunctory self-promotion out of the way. Again, it is Schoharie Crossing State Historic Site. that is because that is where the original Erie Canal crossed the Schoharie Creek, and then the enlarged canal would cross over the Schoharie Creek. And I wanted to provide this satellite image from Google kind of showing you where that is in relation to some other things going on. The New York State Thruway, you can get off at either exit 27 or 28 on the New York State Thruway, and it's a short drive. If you're in New York State, Route 5S or Route 5 it takes you really close, and there is some signage. GPS normally puts you right where you need to be. And we are also, again, along parts of our set are not just on the Schoharie Creek, but also the Mohawk River, which is today's modern canal. So you can see where the 27 is in the center of this image. That is actually dam number 8 at lock E12, the James Shanahan lock of today's modern barge canal, which again opened up today. So just wanted to kind of give you that reference point of where we are in New York State, where we are in location to a bunch of other great ways to get to see us. So it almost feels like I'm trying to sell you some sort of product on a late night infomercial, but I feel like I've covered that, which means I've almost done my job. So again, this was a mashup of Dam That Creek and Otis Eddy's Aqueduct. So for those that may not be aware, or it's just a refresher for others, I'm going to throw out some quick Erie Canal facts so that as I'm talking, hopefully I'm not losing anybody in the mucky waters here. So the Erie Canal was constructed between 1817 and 1825 at a cost of about $7 million, 363 miles long, using 83 locks to make up the difference of over 500 feet elevation between Lake Erie at Buffalo and the Hudson River at Albany. So they had begun those surveys after there was this kind of push. Jesse Howley, underneath the pseudonym of Hercules, had been writing in the early 1800s and made a big push and convinced several legislators, particularly New York City Mayor DeWitt Clinton, that it's a darn good idea to build this canal across New York State because of its geological advantage and what that could mean for New York as well as the early republic, the early nation. And while those surveys were going on, there was some disruption. This pesky thing called the War of 1812 got in the way. But what that does is that actually kind of coalesces and drives the attention to and makes aware the need for better infrastructure and transportation system, particularly across New York State. And so the Canal Commission kind of pushes forward. DeWitt Clinton becomes governor of New York State, and legislation is passed to fund the Erie Canal as well as the Champlain Canal, and construction begins again in 1817. And it is quite amazing to me that it was a New York State Works project that came in just about on budget, and it only took about 8 years. And it is a revolutionary transportation way, and it just kind of goes to the engineering and I guess sort of the vigor and vitality of these young Americans looking to really make these improvements, which actually spurs, as you're probably all quite aware, canal mania across several other states as well. So, as I mentioned, there's the Blue Line survey, the original survey across New York, and these surveyors turned engineers, developed the plan to build the Erie Canal. And in 1816, Charles Broadhead has the role of surveying from Rome, New York, which is about the center point, and that's actually where they began construction about a year later in 1817, all the way up to the Schoharie Creek. And it was sort of not really sure what they were going to do east of there. This is very much the school in which engineers are learning to become engineers. And they are, I try to impart on children that come to visit us that a lot of times you do need to fail in order to learn and move forward and succeed. So they were willing to kind of take on these challenges. And if there's a failure, they just pick themselves back up and keep on going. But in this section that's being surveyed, and this section that the canal is going to run through, is already established region. Had been settled not only by the Haudenosaunee people for generations and generations, but European settlement, particularly in the 18th century, and the movement of Palatine Germans into the Mohawk and Schoharie valleys, and toward Rome, where Fort Stanwix had been. So maybe for Broadhead, it's a little bit different because when you get in the western part of the state and what is often referred to as sort of this virgin territory through the muck and the mire beyond Syracuse and through forested lands. But one of the things to contend with in this eastern section is a settled population of communities and towns. The Erie Canal is known as sort of a city builder or the birthplace of cities along its route. But in this eastern section of the Mohawk Valley, a lot of those places were already established. They just happened to grow after the construction of the canal. And in the section that we're going to kind of focus on here for the sake of this program, Jervis is in charge of the engineering. And that predominantly is between the noses in the Mohawk Valley to Amsterdam, what was known as Port Jackson in Montgomery County. And so if you're not familiar with the noses, it's actually a great geological feature in the Mohawk Valley in which it is this very narrow gap in the Appalachian mountain chain. And that chain of mountains runs essentially from Georgia to Maine. And because of the geological advantage of New York State and having the Mohawk River, the noses are these two prominent outcroppings of stone that have the river cutting through it because when the glaciers receded and caused flooding, and there was Lake Iroquois that had been pulled up where the Great Lakes are now, and all that water would eventually let loose and create the Mohawk Valley. So it is essentially fairly close to a sea level cut through this mountain chain. One of those things that folks, down in Virginia and perhaps down in New Jersey would have really enjoyed of that ease of access across the mountain chain when they were deciding to build their canals. And general oversight underneath Chief Engineer Benjamin Wright and the Canal Commissioner Henry Seymour. And there's a wonderful painting, a wonderful image of the canal going through the Mohawk Valley. And this illustrates the noses. Roughly the Sprakers area of New York State today. There's a few locks in that area. There's actually, if you're driving across New York at Lock E13, there is a visitor center off the New York State Thruway if you're headed out toward the west. You can get near this and be able to witness one of today's very, very much larger and improved barge canal locks and dams. But one of the things that was going to be a problem is they're doing this and they're deciding to build this Clinton's Ditch, a 40-foot wide by 4-foot deep canal across New York State. Is you obviously have lateral bodies of water that are cutting into it. In this area, the Schoharie Creek was going to be one of those concerns. And in this area also it's prone to flooding. One of the reasons why the Schoharie and the Mohawk Valleys were heavily settled because of the fertile grounds, that also was because of the flooding that existed. And because the Schoharie Creek was not only going to have to be crossed, it was also going to need to be a primary source of water for the 50 miles to the east toward Albany. That would mean that there needed to be a slackwater dam. The original crossing of the Erie Canal was through the water of the Schoharie Creek. And they would also need to pool that water up and pound that in some way to drive water into the channel of the canal to supply water eastward for about 50 miles or so. Because as we may all be aware, what is a canal without water? It is literally just a ditch. And so just if we're looking at this map in the background as kind of a reference point, the direction looking down is north on this map. So actually the Schoharie Creek is a 90-mile watershed of the Catskill Mountains emptying into the Mohawk River just about where our great historic site is. But it does flow to the north. And here is where they're going to put the canal across. This is where they need to put a slackwater dam, essentially where there's an old road on the south side of the river coming through, and it would eventually have become a military road and was developed further after the American Revolution. It is pointing this arrow toward where that crossing would be and where the road was. There was a bridge that was built in the late 1700s that washed out, but that is also the location of Fort Hunter. It was a British colonial fort built in 1712, and at least for about a year was a westernmost outpost in the Mohawk Valley until they built a fort out in Oswego the following year. So our history at Schoharie Crossing goes back even before the Erie Canal. But again, they're going to have to do something about this water that flows to the north if they want to travel east and west on an artificial river that is the canal. And they're going to do that right there at that location. So that means they must dam that creek. And this image, as the background here, shows that original canal infrastructure. This is a map from 1834, and that is a Schoharie Creek. And you have, I'm going to see if you can see my mouse here if I move this around. Here is Lock 20. I'm sorry, Lock 19. Lock 19 from the original canal. And if you were headed east, you'd have to go through this lock. It was about a 6-foot lift, putting you on that level. And you would have to go east into the East Guard Lock, which we have still remaining at the site. It's been filled in for preservation, but the East Guard Lock still remains as Schoharie Crossing. And this is where Fort Hunter was. And oftentimes that was done sometimes by towing. The horses or mules on the towpath would come across here, and they'd have to do an exchange over the bridge and come across this bridge here and then be able to cross again. But this was more of a pedestrian way. It was a toll bridge, and oftentimes was under repair or being washed out by the waters of the Schoharie Creek. So actually what winds up becoming much more noted in the traveler guides is that there is a windlass system or a ferry system in which that would pull barges east or west through these single chambered locks during that period of time. And again, those are single chambered locks. You have dozens and dozens of barges that could potentially be holding up on these basin areas waiting. And then if you had a couple of days of heavy rain, the Schoharie Creek really begins to move and causes some problems. But they're going to create a dam, and Colonel John Littlejohn is awarded that contract. It's contract number 353. There he is, the handsome gentleman, Colonel John Littlejohn. He was born in Massachusetts in 1790, fought in the War of 1812, hence his designation as colonel. And he married Eleanor Newkirk in 1823. Let's just keep in mind of Newkirk. Let's remember the name Newkirk here. There's Eleanor, fine-looking lady herself. John would eventually later become a principal builder on the Albany-Schenectady Incline Railroad, and also would work on some other railroads and canal projects along the James River. And again, this is contract 353. This outlines between 1821 up till 1823, the charges to the Canal Commission Fund that John Littlejohn had put in for the construction and then operation. So he constructed the dam and then operated a scow there as well. So he operated the dam, the scow, and the ferry through 1823, but the construction of the dam was 1821 to 1822. And although the Erie Canal was built between 1817 and 1825, it opened in sections. Started east and west in Rome in 1817, but as they were able to open up sections to generate tolls and to make use of it, it opened up. And actually in this section of Schoharie Crossing, the canal through here opened in 1822. So the ferry operating there after 1822 to 1823 is extremely important for those early barges and other canal traffic. And Abraham Newkirk replaced Littlejohn as the dam and lock operator. Abraham Newkirk being the father of Eleanor Newkirk and also landholder adjacent to Lock 19. And I have yet to figure out yet if John Littlejohn knew Eleanor before coming to work there or not, or maybe he happened to meet his bride while building the canal. The total cost for that dam and the services within it for those 2 years was over $17,000, which roughly puts it at just shy of $500,000 in today's money. So that 1822 dam was 8 feet high, and it was 650 feet long. And it was constructed of timber and was set on piles cribbed with stone and was anchored to the wings of the creek with stone masonry. And its first use, keep this in mind, its first use lasted about 10 years. Its second use, 12 years. When it was completed, it was noted, it is a work of considerable magnitude across a stream, which at times sweeps away almost every opposing obstacle. This is, however, a substantial work, and as it has an elevation of only 8 feet, it is believed to be capable of resisting the force of the greatest floods. I'm going to pause there for a moment. Let's think about that one. They believe so. We're going to discuss how the continuing of the dam process will prove that that particular dam was not to the magnitude in which they had hoped. The original dam washed out within that 10 years. The Schoharie Creek, as I point out often, will eat dams, it eats bridges. It is a force to be reckoned with. It is nature at its finest and at its worst. March floods of that year removed 150 feet. They repaired it within a month. Another 100 feet had washed out after those repairs. And throughout the coming months into July, additional repairs were required. So they decided to build a new one. This only makes sense that once your dam continually washes out, you should just refocus and build a new one. That dam actually also requires continuous repairs and maintenance. So in 1845, they decide that they're going to continue that service as part of a feeder system because the dams are still required in the creek, but that is no longer where the Erie Canal crosses the Schoharie Creek. So we're going to talk about this a little bit more on the second part of this program, but in 1845, they are going to work on the dam, but they aren't as concerned about it being as, I guess, worthy to impound water for the crossing of the canal. But they are definitely concerned the creek needs to be dammed in order to bring the water levels up because the portion of original canal becomes a feeder canal system as the Schoharie Creek Aqueduct opens. In 1849, additional works and 1850s entirely destroyed the dam. So they went back to the 1822 version of the dam and kind of put that back to service for what they could. But it was 1862 when they built another one. You kind of see there's a pattern here. They are a series of dams and constant repairs. But at this point, even in 1862, they still need a dam in the creek. So they're spending what is today's equivalent of another $500,000 to do this. They still need that water because the Schoharie Creek, even though the canal doesn't cross through it anymore, it is still a feeder system and they need that water. And actually the need for that water becomes greater through the 1860s, 70s, and 80s. The 1880s, the high water mark, if you will, of tonnage on the canal at 400 million tons in a season is also coinciding where there is some disruptions to the watershed that would feed some of these other feeders from work being done and deforestation, particularly in the Adirondacks. And by the 1880s, the creation of the Adirondack Park is to help mitigate some of that watershed issues that supplies water into the Erie Canal. When folks in New York City are not making their money because the canal isn't shipping things very well, or they're concerned about not having enough water, the Adirondack Park in New York State, forever wild forested lands, becomes a priority to them. The 1862 is about the same height, but it's a little bit shorter. They try a different angle onto the creek. Maybe that would help. It didn't, only lasting a couple of months before it needs to be repaired. The 1864, this is the one where they have decided we are not messing around anymore. We're going to go big. And they use a tree dam that is 11 feet high, and they're going to make it 400 feet long. They're actually going to create some wedging out from the creek, and they are reinforcing it quite a bit with stone masonry along the creek banks. And it uses more than 1,400 trees with diameters up to 22 inches. And let's also keep in mind that this is a project that is happening during the American Civil War. It means that resources are very expensive. Labor is hard to find, and it costs what is the equivalent of $750,000 in today's money. But that is why, and that illustrates how important the feeder system was of the Schoharie Creek and why the dam across the creek for the Erie Canal was so vitally important and would have that expenditure. Although flood damages throughout up through into even the early 20th century. And so by the early 20th century, it's still having the stone reapplied, new lumber being put in, and other cribbing repairs as well. And that lasted up until the early 20th century. So with that, that brings us to the third iteration of the Erie Canal, today's modern barge canal, in which the dam no longer is needed once the canal is put into the canalized Mohawk River. So this kind of shows those different versions as I mentioned. So you have the 1822 and 1832 version of the canal, 650 feet, was at this angle and at this location between the original canal coming through here and what becomes the Schoharie Creek Aqueduct location here. So reference otherwise to where our visitor center is, it would be in this area right next to the East Guard Lock. There's a building. And in low water times, you can actually see remnants, particularly of the 1864 version. Last year, because of COVID, the modern canal system did not come into operation until later July, what actually meant that the dams in the Mohawk River that bring up the water for navigation were not put in place. The movable dam system with the gates and plates did not drop. And that version of what exists underneath the water of that dam was very visible. And actually, several locations on the creek, you could essentially walk across it. When during this time of year, typically, there is a great deal of water. There are pools anywhere between 12 and 15 feet and average depth of about 5 or 6 feet throughout most of the creek when the water is impounded in the river backing up into the creek. This is kind of a dark image, but one from the State Archives kind of showing how the dams across the creek were built. This is one of the later versions, kind of shows, particularly on the bottom, that actually it is built at an angle so that the water flow over the top. So there's my cursor. The water is flowing this way to the north and coming up over that timber and stone structure. And there's planking on the downside, the downslope, so that the water can go over. Anything that, there's also some planking on the side so that debris, the Schoharie Creek even today seems to pick up some weird debris during its high water moments. And you can see very large trees and other things floating, but a lot of this would just come right up over and across the top. And to kind of give you a little bit more of the visuals, the 1864 version. So we're going to be talking about this structure here, the Schoharie Creek Aqueduct. Again, a little bit later, but you have the chief engineer. I always love the pictures where they have the politicians and the engineers, the guys in the big hats come out for their photo op. But this image at the bottom is actually taken from the aqueduct looking to the south. If you're familiar with the area at all, this higher elevation here, which is presumably also the location of the Haudenosaunee Mohawk Lower Castle Village prior to European settlement and the establishment of Fort Hunter. But this higher elevation here is actually where the New York State Thruway crosses over the Schoharie Creek. That might be notable for some people because about 30 years ago, Schoharie Creek washed out the New York State Thruway, taking 10 lives with it. But here is how that looks differently with the dam here. You have the work scows in the back, and that is the 11-foot timber and stone dam that was maintained up through into the early 20th century for feeder system for the Erie Canal. And again, I always have to look at this. This is the wonderful. I wish I had a name for every one of these gentlemen. Maybe somebody somewhere would have that. But the guys in big hats get to show up and get the picture taken.
Just that's you with a little one.
So again, kind of recapping, Colonel John Littlejohn eventually moves out to Allegheny County in Michigan about 1840. He had done other railroad projects and some canal projects. But thanks for the historian's office out in the county and also their Parks and Rec department. There's actually a Littlejohn Park out there in that part of Michigan named after the Littlejohn family. He was prosperous in business, retiring in the 1850s, probably due to the ill health. He was wounded during the War of 1812 at Lundy Lane, and he died in 1868 during a visit to Omaha. So, and the dam remnants, again, this is a great image of the Mohawk Valley, the noses, and the canal passing through it. So here's an image of what the dam, that 1864 dam, looked like about 1900 or so. And I like to use this. It's a little bit grainy, but this barn no longer exists. This burned down in 1969. But this building here used to be known as a quarry house. It is actually the Schoharie Crossing State Historic Site Visitor Center. This window in the center, that's my office window, overlooking what remains of the dam in the creek, and then the East Guard Lock over here in this space. This fuzzy image here is the Fort Hunter School, built in 1890 and operated until actually the 1960s. And it still stands today in private hands and is often noted as being kind of that creepy building in town, particularly during the fall when the corn is up. But there are sections of dam that still remain out there in the creek, particularly when the water's low. If you're out and about in the area early spring or later fall when the canal water is let go in the Mohawk River and the Schoharie waters drop along with it, you can see some of the remnants of the log dam and some of the stone out there as well. So I want to kind of illustrate that there's remnants out there. It was vitally important having a dam across the Schoharie Creek from the 1820s to the early 20th century for the operation of the original and then enlarged Erie Canal. This is kind of a panoramic. It's not that great of a shot. This was last year, right before the water really started to drop. So this is some of the spring water as well. And so if you're out and again, visiting the site and you're nearby during not operation season of today's modern canal, the water is low enough to create a rift in the creek there. So you can see where that version of the dam had crossed. But the reason why the dam was still there to feed the water, but not there because of the crossing, is because of Otis Eddy's aqueduct. So it's an impressive engineering feat, and we have the remains of it at the site. I'm just going to do a quick recap. We just talked about this, but the original crossing was through the creek. You needed that slackwater dam, and you would cross from, if you're headed east, you're going from Lock 19 to the East Guard Lock. And again, it opens 825. Huge success, huge success. And what New Yorkers like to do, and probably folks in New Jersey as well, is when something is successful, you want to do it again. You want to make it bigger and you want to make it better. You want to make it even more successful. And so what happens is the enlargement era of the canal begins in 1836 and actually runs up generally until about 1862. The Civil War kind of gets in the way of several of the enlargement projects. But at that point, what winds up happening is those improvements to the system, you go from a 40 by 4 foot canal to a 70 by 7 foot canal. And one of the other improvements that's really helpful is you go from single chamber locks to double chamber locks. Now you can have a barge going east and a barge going west at about the same time. And so those bigger locks and the fact that there's two of them would precipitate a larger increase in the traffic and transportation, ease of access for transportation across New York State from Buffalo to Albany. And so with that enlargement of the Erie Canal, the other major improvements are things like aqueducts. And even back when we go back to 1822 when they're building the dam, and even prior where there's a survey, and Charles Broadhead and John Jervis, they're looking at the canal and they just don't know what they're going to do on the east side of the Schoharie. But they knew that the Schoharie was going to be a problem. Particularly during, again, some flooding events and in the springtime. They knew it was going to be an issue with the dam, and they would have loved to have been able to build an aqueduct. It didn't fit into the plan. It didn't fit into the cost expenditures, and they just needed more engineering experience. But also that location that was identified for the original crossing of the creek was kind of put in there. There's already a bridge. It's a nice, the topography worked for it. But underneath the Schoharie Creek, it's glacial till. There's a lot of stone, and it's very difficult. You have to go down quite a ways before you hit anything that resembles bedrock. And so an aqueduct at that location wasn't going to be as feasible. So you advance only a couple decades, some of the technology changes, the confidence in the engineering changes. And so they decide that at the Schoharie Creek, they're going to build an aqueduct. And there's let out a notice in papers far and wide. I use this one because this evidence at this point, canal contracts are being announced. It's upstate New York, it's the Mohawk Valley, but they are announcing it down in Virginia. You have canal contractors, canal engineers, because of the Erie and the lateral canals and canals that are being built in Pennsylvania and New Jersey and Maryland, you have a lot more people that by the 1830s that are able to build or work on canals, and New York State is sort of looking to have that expertise come back into New York. A lot of the engineers from the original canal have gone on, particularly folks like Jervis, who have gone on to other projects, other canals and railroad projects. I won't talk about the railroad too much, though. I work at a canal site, so I really don't want to talk about the railroad. So they're trying to draw some of those back in to do this work. And so this is a notice for contract being let out in the Richmond Enquirer, 1838. And construction of that, it's kind of hard to see here, but the announcement is saying for constructing an aqueduct across the Schoharie Creek of about 600 feet in length and a section of canal adjoining the same. They're required to receive and use the stone and other materials which have been procured and partially procured for a portion of the locks to allow, therefore, the price or prices at which they have been estimated to the present contractors. So there's already supposed to be state materials or at least a schedule of and a cost estimation in 1838 for these contractors. And it does state that the locks, aqueducts, and sections to be completed by the 15th day of October, 1840. Construction begins on the Schoharie Creek Aqueduct in 1839. Even though at that point by the 1830s, the nation, and particularly New York, is going through an economic recession. The stop and tax law is putting kind of a kink on this whole thing, stopping several of the projects, delaying that. But because of the economic recession and the stop and tax, these materials and the cost of construction changed dramatically from the 1838 contract bidding and approval phase. So Otis Eddy does receive the contract to build the Schoharie Creek Aqueduct, and his estimation is not going to line up with the actual cost by the time the work is completed. That stop and tax law, again, it suspends many of these projects, and the Canal Commission funds projects in particular. So there's several of those projects, particularly in the Jordan level and across the state, that are being held up. But there are some projects that are of such importance that the Canal Commission is saying that they need to proceed. There's delays. They might not get the full amount of money. There's some stoppages, sort of like we've encountered during this COVID, where one of the reasons why the canal last year didn't open on time was because they had stopped doing a lot of the repair work that they normally do in the off season. And so by the time they were able to come back into work, it put these projects behind. So during this phase, though, this is all part of, between the 1830 and 1839 was part of this infrastructure project work on the canal that the commission was supposed to be funding at a total of about $10 million. And this was underneath the governor, William Seward. And I just like to point out the fact that, he's governor of New York State at the time. And this is a project on the canal, which was known, I guess, affectionately now, but at the time as Clinton's Folly for Governor DeWitt Clinton. But Seward would eventually have his own folly. Everybody kind of disparagingly thought that Alaska was a bad idea, but I guess it's worked out pretty well for the U.S. to have Alaska. So Otis Eddy is instructed to continue and complete the aqueduct according to his contract, which states, again, October 15th of 1840. So he takes on additional lines of credit and is trying to fulfill this contract, this obligation. He's taking on more debt and trying to expedite the work. And the materials cost a lot more than what they did when he was awarded that contract. And it winds up delaying the project, and the aqueduct is completed on December 1st of 1841. And he doesn't receive immediate payment, particularly in full on that contract. The actual total for the building of the aqueduct comes out to $177,172.19, which is roughly $5.2 million in today's funding. So that is, if you look at what the allocated works project between 1838 and 1839 for projects on the canal of $10 million at that point in time, I can't do the math in my head. I went to school for history, not math. But, you're looking at hundreds of millions of dollars in today's money for that project. But the completed crossing, so this is the second version. The original is through the creek. This is over the creek of this man-made artificial river of the Erie Canal. Goes into operation in 1845 because it was awaiting other projects to be completed that had been held back. And a great deal of political wrangling and going on at this point in time. 1841, when the aqueduct is complete, in 1845, when it goes into operation. And it's really kind of interesting to follow when the newspapers across New York State calling out the New York State Regency and government officials for apparently at the time, it would have only cost about $90,000 to complete those projects, expedite the process, and to put the aqueduct in use. A lot of people were calling out the fact that they had built this aqueduct to make it easier to cross the Schoharie Creek and to fix some of those issues and expedite transportation of the canal through the Mohawk Valley. But there it sat for the lack of only $90,000 when it cost so much to even construct it. But it is noted as one of the biggest improvements during the enlargement era. Again, mostly, you don't have to worry about what the creek is doing at that point. You can continue your barges across it, locking down or up at Lock 30 on the east side. Again, it's a very impressive structure. It was 624 feet over 14 arches with a wooden trough holding the enlarged Erie Canal. And I always like to bring this one up. We talk about bridges, and I hate to point out, but I'm sure that the folks in New Jersey are aware that bridges can be very political. And that's where I'll stop my comments. But one of the things that I find interesting, this article that I had come across back in October of 1842, it was published and actually ran in several other newspapers in New York State. And I think I actually found one of those out of state at the time. And it's a kind of a long article. I'm going to summarize it for you. But again, the Regency of New York State and the politicians are being called out for the lack of that $90,000 to put the aqueduct into use by bringing the other parts of the canal into operation. So at that point in time, because the aqueduct is constructed, it has a wooden trough on it, and it's actually holding water. It needs to be maintained, and they're actually employing a man at the pump. So this is a very eloquent article, but to boil it down is that every so often somebody has to go over there and make sure that they put more water back up onto the canal because it'll leak through the wooden trough or it's otherwise evaporating. In order to preserve the wooden trough and the structure, it needs water. So this is another point where they're talking about this mismanagement of the canal. And they're really kind of calling out in particular, instance of bad management at the aqueduct crossing of the Schoharie Creek. So it becomes very politicized at this point in time, calling out these politicians, even during this era in which, stop tax law has kind of been becoming, it's getting kind of lifted and they're really kind of dumping back into the canal projects. But that's all kind of because you have the Locos Focus party. It's sort of this little bit extreme wing of political party that is really kind of anti-government spending at the time. So there's a lot of calls out of, if the Empire State is going to be putting this kind of investment, we put all this money into building this canal and this operation, that we need to be able to maintain it. We need to be able to operate it to its fullest extent for the prosperity of New York. And also some of the newspapers are reporting it's not just a New York thing. By the 1840s, the Erie Canal has opened up the interior of the continent, and that it is a part of a much larger network and system of canals and eventually what would become railroads and canals in America. And it's essential to the operation, transportation, and economics of not just New York, but also the nation. Again, another article kind of talking about the mismanagement of it. And to kind of follow up a little bit, what winds up happening, and this article kind of talks about it, is that because the Canal Commission Fund had money to construct and operate the canal and to do repairs, but not to preserve any portion of the canal, because somebody was being paid to preserve it, a non-working part of the canal at that point in time, they weren't really sure how they were going to pay them. Maybe some people can relate to government positions like that. Anyway, so Otis Eddy, again, was a contractor. I'm going to kind of go through here. He was influential in early Ithaca out near the Finger Lakes of New York State, establishing Otis Eddy and Company's paper production, and actually got into some cotton mill as well, and was advertising the papers that his shirt cotton was not weighted with salt or other materials. It was good, fine quality shirt linen. And you might recognize this, Ezra Cornell. And so you're maybe you're wondering why a name like Ezra Cornell? It's familiar. What's that have to do with Otis Eddie? Otis Eddie actually gave Ezra Cornell a job in his machine shop. And that would kind of get repaid back as well. So if you're not familiar, Cornell is a great inventor, one of the founder of Cornell University, a great institution here in New York, and probably well known for engineering in America as well. But because of the economic panic in 1837, Otis Eddie closes his shop and kind of takes a look at canal contracts, eventually leading him to the 1838 contract award for the Schoharie Creek Aqueduct. And he passed away in 1843, never having actually seen his aqueduct operate as part of the canal. His gravestone out in Ithaca. And he was survived by his wife, Harriet, who actually would go on to try to get the creditors paid off and to be awarded the money that they felt was owed to them for the construction of the aqueduct. So Harriet, the widow, and Otis Eddie's son, one of his sons, have to go through the process of the long entanglement of suing New York State for funds. Eventually, they are provided money, or they don't necessarily get all of their lines of credit covered. But again, coming back to the mentorship of Ezra Cornell, that gets brought back again. Eddie's son, James, is mentored by Ezra Cornell, who happened to also, Ezra Cornell worked with Morse in development of telegraph systems. So Eddie's son, James, becomes the head of the American Telegraph Company, which would become Western Union. Eddie also left behind a legacy of industry in Ithaca with Eddyville. It was the industrialized mill section of Ithaca. And if you happen to be familiar with the Eddy Gate and Cascadia Hall at the Cornell University, that is where Otis Eddie had his businesses. That was those locations of where on campus now that his mill was, and the Eddy Gate is nearby as an honor to James as well as Otis Eddie. And obviously, for our intents and purposes, the Schoharie Creek Aqueduct is one of the lasting legacies of Otis Eddie. So much so was he proud of such that his name was put on it. Otis Eddie, builder 1841, is a stone, a capstone on the towpath side of the Schoharie Creek Aqueduct. And just underneath the word company, those stones hanging precariously off the edge, that is the Otis Eddie stone that still remains in the Schoharie Creek Aqueduct. So after its operation, we'll have to talk about that because, again, as I mentioned, the canal of today's New York State barge canal system went into the canalized Mohawk River in the early 20th century. In 1905, they do that survey to figure out what they're going to do, and it becomes the survey itself is actually the basis for the model we have in our exhibit, A Pathway to Empire, that is the Schoharie Creek Aqueduct, Lock 30, and part of the enlarged Erie Canal. We pulled all that information from that 1905 survey. So the Mohawk River, the eastern section of the canal, is canalized in 1916. So actually in 1916, there's actually a WPD, the Department of Public Works memo that goes out that the wooden trough could be removed. They were authorized to remove the wooden trough. If they took any, they had to take all of it. And it was actually used as cofferdams and molds at the lock in Rotterdam Junction, which is a little bit east towards Schenectady, New York, as they were building the dam and the lock. That's Lock 9 out there in Rotterdam Junction. So that's where the wood wound up from the aqueduct. It becomes an area of recreation. There's a small kind of beach area, which actually is where a boat launch is now at the site, and picnic space. There's actually a lot of recreation that occurred off from it. People would fish from there. Archaeological evidence shows that there was obviously some probably either fish and or bird hunting that occurred from the aqueduct, as well as early vehicles, early cars would drive across it as a means to get across the creek as well. There was a gentleman that used to come visit me at the site. He just recently passed. He's a World War II vet. John Miller used to come and visit, and he would talk about how he grew up in that area in Tribes Hill, just across the river. And they used to come down, particularly Sunday after church. He said there was always, people out there swimming in the water, guys selling hot dogs, and family fun. So it's been an area of recreation since shortly after its operation, and it still is part of a state historic site and park area for recreation today. In the early 1940s, removal of those eastern arches, so the arches on this side, due to impounding of water because of flood episodes, particularly in the spring, ice would jam and create flooding in Fort Hunter. So Army Corps of Engineers came in and intentionally removed arches from the aqueduct and compromised the stability of that structure, and we've lost several more arches. What does that mean as a New York State historic site? Again, I kind of went over this before, but the 400 Canal Society forming in the 1950s led to the State Bureau of Preservation creating a state historic site and park in 1966. And because our Erie Canal features are registered national landmarks, and also today's modern barge canal system in the Mohawk River and across New York State is a national landmark, there's a great opportunity for partnerships, as well as a need to preserve and interpret and tell people about the history of our canal here in New York State, and particularly as I like to focus in on. You can go in a lot of places in New York State, you can go online, all sorts of things, and find out about the Erie Canal. But if you really want to see all those three versions of the canal, Schoharie Crossing is the place to come. We have unique stories to our location that we can share with you as well. Late 1970s, there's a preservation effort to stop the degradation of the aqueduct and what remained of it. In the late 1990s, unfortunately, that steel tendon cable system had failed, and we lost another 2 arches into the creek. So 6 of the original 14 arches remain today. Again, I'm not much of a math guy, but somewhere I did the math, and that comes out to about 41%. And here's an image of what that stabilization of the 1970s looked like, creating sort of this overhanging arch with steel tendon cables that would pull back and hold it in place to at least hopefully mitigate that shift that is from east to west. But there is vertical and horizontal shifting that occurs. It's less about flood episodes, a little bit more about scour and washout, but also the freezing and thawing cycle without that counterbalance of the trough full of water. And those arches already missing part of their substantial structure and self-supporting nature on the other side. It winds up becoming unstable, which leads to the Preservation League of New York setting the save list in 2018 to 2019, which was kind of pushed into the statewide advocacy to preserve the Schoharie Creek Aqueduct. And the Schoharie Creek Aqueduct Alliance Committee was formed. And other partners came on board: the Erie Canalway National Heritage Corridor, the Preservation League of New York, the Canal Society of New York, and Montgomery County, the county in which the site is located, along with several other organizations and individuals, particularly the Friends of Schoharie Crossing nonprofit, have come on board to make the call for the preservation, stabilization of the aqueduct. These are some great images taken by Bruce Harvey as part of the project for the Preservation League. And shameless promotion, I'll leave this up just for a few moments, but you can always reach out to us if you're interested in learning more about this project and where it stands. And I can gratefully and gladly report you are some of the first few people to hear a little bit more. Engineers have been out to do their assessments. The contract should be going out to bid sometime in the next several weeks, with an estimated project date falling somewhere in between November and December of 2021. So the stabilization of the Schoharie Creek Aqueduct has been moving forward. Montgomery County received a very large grant, which is being matched and exceeded upon by the Historic Sites Bureau of New York State to create the stabilization so that we hopefully will no longer have any loss of the arches of the aqueduct. So that's a project that we're all looking forward to seeing follow through, and hopefully folks can come out, visit the site maybe this year, and then come back in future years and still be able to see that aqueduct and what remains of it standing out there in the creek. Just a quick glimpse into our Pathway to Empire exhibit. Some great model of Schoharie Creek Aqueduct that you come and explore if you're there at the site. It's really cool because it also, we talk about Brown's Cash Store and Lock 30 there as well, and some touchscreens. It's a wonderful exhibit and relatively new, opening in 2018. And that's actually quite new for most historic sites when it comes to exhibits. This is the part where I typically will decide to get on a high horse, wax poetic, and we're looking at this wonderful sunset image of the Schoharie Creek Aqueduct as it looked, it wasn't last year, it was the year before. This is typically the point in the program where I talk about it's not so much of a setting sun on the Schoharie Creek Aqueduct as it's sort of a, the sun may be setting in this image, but we have a new sunrise on the horizon for preservation of the aqueduct. With the bicentennial kind of mid-swing right now of the celebrations of the Erie Canal. We started in 2017 and it'll go to 2025. The 200 years of canal in New York State. There's a lot of potential, a lot of growth, and a bright future ahead by connecting with folks like yourselves, the Canal Society of New Jersey, kind of sharing our history, sharing what we have to offer, and also hopefully, because it's only a few short weeks away when we'll host Tim Roth from the Canal Society of New Jersey to talk about the Morris Canal. We can do this where we're talking to other canal sites. There's the New York State Canal Conference in September, and also the World Canals Conference in early September down in Hagerstown. So there's a lot of interest. I kind of joked a little bit earlier about, people seem to be interested in these canal things. So with that, I really do appreciate and thank you so much for having me this evening. It's a Friday evening. It's beautiful weather, and for you to hang out at a computer or on a tablet or a cell phone and tune in for this, I greatly appreciate it. Hopefully you've learned a few things. I'd be willing to take some questions, and I'll leave this up for a little while. Contact information on the screen. You can reach out. You can find us on Facebook by searching. We have a New York State Parks website. You can find that by Googling it, and you see what we have going on, our events, programs, or just learn a bit more. You can always reach out to me if you think of something. If you wake up 3 o'clock in the morning and there's just some question that's been nagging you, feel free to send an email. Don't call. I won't be there at 3 o'clock in the morning, but feel free to send an email and I'll get back to you. Try to answer any of your questions or provide information.
Great.
So thank you very much.
Thank you, David. There were a couple of questions that came in during the presentation. This one was when we had, I guess, the original bridge. How did they handle the tow animals if boats were winched or ferried across the river?
Yeah, so there's a couple different ways depending on that. And I pulled this mostly from early 1830s travel guides. So that windlass system would happen. And sometimes those draft animals could be walked across the bridge, but not have to be towing the barge. You did have to pay a toll to get across that bridge. But it also meant that you didn't have the issue of, a flow of water in one direction while you're going the other way, pulling on the horses as well, or the mules as well. But most often the animals, the draft animals, were tailed onto the barges, particularly the early era of the canal, the first few years. But there was also the employment of a ferry or a scow that could actually take them across as well. So a couple different versions of ways to do it. And it might have been the availability of those different ways. Some of it might have cost, again, because of the toll. And there was a couple ways to do that. Essentially, I boil it down to mostly that they were tailed onto the barge itself to be pulled across, or that they were carried on a separate vessel.
Thank you. Another question was, can you show the alignment of the West Shore Railroad in relation to this?
Oh, somebody wants me to talk about railroads. Ouch. Yeah. Let me go.
I would guess in one of the original overview maps.
Okay. Yeah. So this one is probably gonna be the best one for that. Right here. Okay. So the original alignment for that, actually, in this area, because we have the Empire State Trail, it, for the most part, goes along with proximity to where the entire Erie has gone across New York State. The thing with that, though, is in Montgomery County, it is actually where the old railroad was, West Shore Railroad. So it is this alignment here, this white line here. And across here, this is the West Shore Railroad Bridge that was constructed in about 1906. I have a gruesome story about that. That's part of another program. You could probably find that one on YouTube or Facebook somewhere, called Strange History of the Erie Canal, if you want to hear that gruesome story. It's shameless self-promotion, I'm sorry. Yeah, so this white line here, so the West Shore Railroad went up along here, crossing the Schoharie Creek, and going this way.
Thank you.
Through and run along the South Shore. And up on this side, you can see this line here. This is what the New York Central used to run on. This railroad track. That's the only railroad that still runs through this part of the valley.
One more question here. Do you know if there was any familial relationship between Caleb Eddy, who was agent for the Middlesex Canal, and Otis Eddy of the Schoharie crossing?
I don't, and that's a good question. Whomever had posed that, if you don't mind, if you want to shoot that to me in an email. I had reached out and I've had a few brief conversations with the Eddy Family Association and a little bit of that. I'm tasked with a lot of activities and research at the site and haven't had the opportunity, unfortunately, to dive super deep into that family as much as I might want to do. So that might spark a little bit of extra interest in a direction that I could kind of look at, so I could find out or kind of revisit the genealogy of that family.
Also have a comment here from board member and museum director Rich Richter. Biked through that area back in 2013. A friend and I from Amsterdam to a few miles west of Schoharie. John Roof, whose name is familiar to people who visited the museum at Waterloo, was also from there. His gravestone is in our museum. Wow. And actually, there was a question attached to that. Are there any remains of the outlet lock on the west shore?
No, not really. There is some stone foundations. That particular location, that's in private hands, so I don't get over there to kind of explore around. I know that we have some images of some foundations, but there was a farmhouse there that had conceivably reused the stone. It was built much later, so after the 1840s. And so recycling isn't a new idea. It's just a little bit different these days. So a lot of the stone, there is a stone foundation, and there is some opening, more trench type, wider breadth trenching over there, presumably from the basin that was on that side. But as far as the actual lock itself, there's not really any remnants of that. But again, we have the East Guard lock, and if you're looking for original, it's about a half mile of Clinton Stitch, that original canal, and it does become that feeder down toward the center of our site, Empire Lock and Lock 20 from the original. That's a pleasant little walk, either about a quarter or a half mile, depending on how you get to it. And I always love that spot because there's other locations over at the boat launch, and to see the aqueduct, you can have there's a parking lot, or the east end of the site down at Yankee Hill, it's double chamber lock from the enlargement. There's a parking lot. To see Empire Lock and that section where the original became the feeder to the enlarged, you have to be a little bit invested for at least that short walk or a short bike ride in there on the towpath, which makes it a little more, in my opinion, a pleasant experience. There aren't people sitting in their cars with the music turned up and everything like that. It's a little bit more quaint and quiet.
Okay. With that is the end of the questions. Joe, do you have any last words?
I do. David, thank you for an excellent presentation. I think we all want to jump in our cars and come and visit you. I guess you told us that the grounds are open, and I assume we can check your website to see when the visitor center might be available for visitation. So this was absolutely, I can't wait to come up and visit you. So
great. Well, let me know when you're coming, and I'll make sure that I give you the dime tour for the nickel price.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us tonight. This presentation has been recorded, and it will be up on our YouTube site on the web. If you want to review it or you want to tell your friends about it, just tune into our our YouTube site, just canalsocietynewjersey.org, and you'll find a whole list of presentations that we've got there for your enjoyment. Coming up, the main newsletter. You haven't received it yet. It's been delayed, but it is coming. And so please just watch your mailbox. In the next 2 weeks, you should have it in hand. Thank you for joining us tonight. Enjoy the summer season. Watch your emails for messages about events for Canal Day events in Wharton and in Waterloo. And hopefully we will be having our regular weekend programming at Waterloo soon. No decisions have been made about that yet, but again, watch your emails and we'll let you know when we'll be opening the Canal Museum and the boat exhibit there in Waterloo. Also, let us know how we did tonight. We have a slightly different format. We asked you to email back in and let us know and register for this presentation after we had a bad experience last time. But if this didn't work well for you, please let us know so we'll get better and better at giving you good presentations and interesting talks. Folks, enjoy your summer. We'll see you again. It's September. Our September meeting will hopefully be in person. Everything is loosening up little by little, more and more. And we hope to see you all in September. And we'll let you know. We've already got a really good program lined up for you. And so watch your emails and we will give you some information as things develop. So again, thank you so much. And we're going to say good night and watch your emails for additional information. Thank you again.
Thank you all.